Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hot Seat. I'm Scott Mitchell. This is my friend Andy Moore. You wear a lot of hats, and one of them is a Stetson Open Road, but we'll talk about that in just a second. But you're with Let's Fix This today and some other organizations you work with. We're going to talk a little public involvement. Good to have you, Andy.
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here.
By the way, you do wear a Stetson Open Road.
I do. I love it.
Some people call it the LBJ.
That's what I call it.
It's a great hat, so thanks for keeping that tradition alive. Although not many people are doing it, so it's great to have you. Let's start with what Let's Fix This is doing right now. You're, 10 years old?
9 years old, yeah. We started in early 2016 around the big budget crisis we had back then, really just as a personal project to get people involved in politics. I had never been involved either, but I knew at that point that our core services were being cut across the state, and it was really starting to impact me and people I cared about. And so I made a Facebook event and invited people to go to the Capitol with us and start to build relationships with our elected officials.
Now you're at the forefront of some really high-profile activity that people are starting to talk about. One of them, let's start with at the top, which everybody knows this. Our voter participation in Oklahoma is really bad. Why is that?
That's a great question. Yeah, if you look back from 1978 to 2004, Oklahoma was really middle of the pack when it comes to voter turnout. And then beginning in 2008, we dropped to 42nd, then 46th, and now 50th in voter participation. We are the lowest state in the entire country. And I think that comes down to the fact that voters feel like their vote doesn't matter. And when they turn out, or they don't turn out, then it really doesn't. And so one of the things that Let's Fix This wants to do is turn that around and at least get Oklahoma back to the middle of the pack in terms of voter participation each election.
There are a couple of things that are out there on this level. One, voter participation in the initiative process. Some folks are trying to open up the primary system. So let's start with the initiative petition process. There was some legislation this year. There have been opponents of this activity at the legislature have said they're trying to, legislators, the majority of legislators, are trying to shut people out of the initiative petition process. Start with the process, what it is, and whether or not that's actually happening.
Yeah, well, we could have a 3-hour course on the initiative petition process in Oklahoma because we have the most difficult process in the entire country. Only about half of states have the ability, voters have the ability to put a state question on their ballot. Oklahoma is one of them. In fact, we were the first state to put that into our state constitution. It is the first right given to the people of Oklahoma. And what we see right now is that the legislature, who is the other way that bills get passed, really wants to hold on to that power for themselves. And by blocking out voters, they try to consolidate that power just for them, just for the politicians.
And the process that was done this year, the legislation was done this year, what does that do to the process?
It does a lot of things. So this was Senate Bill 1027. It restricts a lot of stuff to do with who can circulate a petition, like who can collect signatures. It limits it to people in state. There's a lot of background checks, ID badges. People who collect signatures would have to know if they're being paid and by whom. These are things that in most campaigns are volunteer-led. They're not being paid, and they don't even know who is donated to that campaign. They trust that this is a public process. The bill also did some really important things that would restrict the number of signatures that can be collected in each county and thus statewide, which really limits the number of people who could even sign a petition. Right now, if a campaign, well, before the bill, if the campaign wanted to collect 1 million signatures and they could do so in the 90 days, that would be totally possible. But right now it's limited to only about 230,000, which means in a lot of counties, fewer than 100 people would even be allowed to sign a petition to get something on the ballot. And so we see these as really a direct threat to voters' autonomy and voters' ability to self-govern here in Oklahoma.
Where is this fight headed, even on that legislation, that signed legislation?
So that is actually at the state Supreme Court right now. A group of citizens came together to challenge the legislation after session was over, and it is sitting before the state Supreme Court right now. We're all kind of waiting with bated breath to see how they'll rule on that. But I would tell you, Scott, that regardless of what the court says, this is a sure sign to Oklahomans that we need to be diligent about protecting our right to petition our government. And I think that means that we need to get together and pass an initiative petition on initiative petitions. We need to reform the process to ensure that the legislature can no longer meddle with it, that we need to protect this power for voters the way the framers of our Constitution outlined and the way we've had it for the last 110 years.
So this is not really a righty or lefty sort of issue. And I think back in recent history, I mean, the 75% tax increase threshold, term limits, that was all very conservative organizations running those. They're in law. Medical marijuana. There are other petitions that are out there lining up to go forward.
Yeah, the initiative petition is open to everybody. One of my first memories about politics in Oklahoma when I moved here was the Right to Work initiative petition. It was a conservative-led effort that was successful. The process is so difficult, though. Only about 20% of all of the measures that have ever been filed have even made it to the ballot, much less passed. And so you're exactly right. This is not a partisan effort. This is a people effort. This really is something that it's about who is allowed to pass laws in our state. And we, like 25 other states, are allowed to have that process open to the citizens, and we want to protect that moving forward.
You had mentioned earlier, you said, look, people just don't think they've got any power anymore inside of our elections. There's some efforts, and it's not just left or right. There is an effort to open up the primary system. Now, Democrats have an open primary process. Republicans don't. Some proponents of this are saying, man, this would change the face of Oklahoma. Help us understand what is behind this effort and what it means.
Yeah, when you talk about right versus left, Republicans and Democrats, we get into a conversation about winning, and this is really not about winning. This should be about governing, right? In Oklahoma, there are almost as many independent voters now as Democrats. In the next few years, I anticipate we'll see independent voters become the second largest group voting bloc in the state. And they are closed out. We have statewide elected officials. I think the insurance commissioner was elected in a closed primary, which means that 3/4 of Oklahomans didn't get a say in that election. And that's not the democracy we were promised, right? That's not even a republic at that point. And so what the open primaries effort is trying to do is to create a unified primary where every candidate, regardless of their party affiliation, is on the same ballot with that party label. But it more importantly means that every voter, regardless of their affiliation, is allowed to vote in that primary, and that the top two vote getters would go on to the general election where everyone else gets to vote yet again.
Why do you think some in Republican Party are fighting hard against that, opening up the primary?
Yeah, I mean, this is not a partisan issue, it's a power issue. Same thing why the Republicans were the ones pushing back against our efforts to reform redistricting and end gerrymandering in Oklahoma a few years ago, is that they're the party in power. They have the most to lose right now. Now, in 50 or 100 years, could it be flipped back? Yeah, possibly, right? And we've seen Democrats in blue states oppose this same kind of thing. They want to have a stranglehold on who is allowed to carry that name, that party name, which is a bit of a misnomer because even right now, you and I both could file for governor next year as Republicans, and there's nothing the party can do about it. That primary might be a way for them to weed out people they don't like. But at the end of the day, a political party is a private organization, and they benefit from publicly funded elections. And we think that's gatekeeping in a way that is antithetical to democracy and is not the way that most voters want to see their government run.
If Republicans had open primaries, what would the state of Oklahoma look like in 10 years?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think the interesting thing about open primaries is that it changes the incentives for how candidates campaign and how they govern once they're elected, right? Right now, if you're running for office, you necessarily cater to the primary voters from your party, which is a small subset of usually very partisan folks, very conservative or very liberal voters. And that does not represent the majority of voters in our state. When you ask people at the grocery store or at the hardware store if they vote or not, they say, no, I don't, because these people are crazy on both sides, and I'm more of a moderate. Well, right now, moderates are effectively blocked out. By opening the primaries, it means that those voters in the middle who do feel left out today will have a greater say over what might happen in the direction of our state, and it incentivizes candidates to be more responsive to more voters, which in my mind means more accountability and better representation for all of us.
For people who want to be civically involved, it's more than just voting. You advocate a lot of civic involvement in groups organizations that are civically minded, right? That's something that is it missing right now in Oklahoma?
Yeah, and this is a trend across the country. Oklahoma, I think, is tip of the spear on the bad end of this, where we've seen a decline in civic groups participating, Rotaries, Lions Club, Elks Club, those kinds of things. Declines in voter participation and turnout and people volunteering to be poll workers even. We even see a decline in church attendance, even in Oklahoma. And so when that happens, we become more isolated and separated from one another. We lose our sense of community and our sense of identity as who we are as Oklahomans. And one of the big things that we want to do with Let's Fix This over the next 18 months is to help people meet their neighbors again, reconnect, build community. I was on a meeting this morning with a handful of organizations that are working on a film series at Rodeo Cinema here in Oklahoma City. And the first one that we're going to screen next month is called Join or Die, which is a severe title, but it's a sequel to the book Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. And this movie really seeks to kind of describe this trend across the country and encourage people to get out there, to join clubs, to join groups, to join their neighbors and rebuilding that sense of community in America.
Let me take you to the area we talked to, and we'll be talking tomorrow morning with Alex Cameron about this rescission effort that's going to happen in D.C. You've been involved in both of those aspects of it. Number one, PEPFAR, which was a program that President Bush 43 did, which dealt with HIV in Africa. You've worked in that field before. The Trump administration's wanting to cut all of that. Where are we in that fight, HIV fight, all around the globe? How important was PEPFAR? Where are we at today?
Yeah, we're not in a good spot today. I did work in the HIV community for about 10 years and got to know those people in that community very deeply. The PEPFAR program that George W. Bush instituted was literally life-changing for tens of millions of people around the world. America is blessed to be the most affluent and successful country in the history of the world, and we have a responsibility to use that success to ensure the livelihood and the success of other people around the country. Since the cuts to PEPFAR earlier this year, estimates range between 12 and 26 million people may have already died from HIV and AIDS, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. These are lives that could have been saved by simply keeping the funding going to ensure they've got access to food and medication and other life-saving resources. And that's going to come back and hit us here at home. Even though we think of America as an affluent and generally healthy country, the way that we treat folks that are suffering from debilitating illnesses, from other disabilities, really says a lot about what we value as a country. And so I hope that we'll see some changes around healthcare policy and funding and as we move forward through this administration.
I'm reading some Churchill right now. It's very difficult. He uses very big words. And it's talking about when in the 20s and the 30s, the United States withdrew, became very isolationist. We're seeing the same thing happen here. We've seen what happened to USAID. For people who are like trying to understand isolationism and public health around the world, they go, what are we getting out of sending money to Africa? Or what are we getting out of sending stuff to Central Asia, those sorts of things? Help people understand who are seeing this going on right now, why it's important that perhaps the United States not become isolationist.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can make an allegory to our individual families, right? During the pandemic, we all necessarily, in many cases, isolated some or stayed home, and it just pulled back from societal participation. For a lot of folks, that was lonely. It cut them off from other services. It meant that there was a lot of substance abuse, a lot of physical abuse or domestic violence that happened that went unreported or undiscovered. And just because you were trying to stay home and take care of your family doesn't mean that we don't also have a shared responsibility for building that community more broadly. That extends across our blocks and our neighborhoods. That also extends across the globe. We are all have the unique opportunity to be on this planet for 60, 70, 80 years. I really hope that we do the most we can with the time we have to make sure that we are trying to impart love, connection, community, help, and support to one another wherever we can. And that might be, again, down the street, that might be in another continent. But when we pull back, we give space for bad influences, for pain and suffering to enter those spaces. And I don't think that's something that America really wants for around the world.
The other aspect of rescission is the discussion. The president's made it very clear to Republican senators, you need to be with me on defunding PBS. You do a weekly deal occasionally at KOSU with the Great Neva Hill. We have Dick Pryor and his group down at Norman, KGWS up in Tulsa. So, and my mother, who is a religious Lawrence Welk watcher, some folks are starting to go, wait a minute, this is kind of going too far. This is not a conservative, liberal sort of thing. Help us understand what you're hearing about this effort aimed at PBS and why it's important for people to tune in on this issue.
Yeah, I think almost everybody, your mom and my mom included, and I'm sure you and I both, Scott, grew up watching PBS, whether it was Lawrence Welk or Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, or a cooking show in the mornings. This is programming that is designed for Americans by Americans across the country. It is often the only station that provides news or entertainment for some communities. They also provide really necessary emergency notification services for especially in rural areas. And so I think PBS and NPR and these kind of public things have been partisanized, right, politicized in ways that most of us could never have imagined and still struggle to really understand how we got here. I don't know that attacks will continue forever, but in the short run, right, there's a dire threat that we will lose access to this kind of programming. And I think all we can do at this point really is to call our members of Congress and express our support for that. If you've got a hotline to Senator Mullen or Lankford or someone's a decision maker, I really encourage everyone to just take 2 minutes, 5 minutes to make that phone call or send a message and let them know that this is something that you value and want to keep around.
It's a question as we get to the end of our wonderful conversation. Thanks for being in here, which is people are concerned about the algorithm, and if you look at one entity and take it out, you can judge whether right or left. How do you consume news so that you're not subject to the algorithm and that you're able to get as much information as you can to try to discern the truth? When you want to discern the truth, how do you consume?
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish between news and entertainment. And over the last decade or so, we've seen a huge tilt towards entertainment, trying to capture those eyeballs, those few precious seconds on a cell phone screen. And I try to avoid that at all costs, right? Over the last year, I've really reduced my news consumption, but been more focused in it, where I only check reputable, established news entities, especially local ones, right? So things like Non-Doc, Oklahoma Voice, Oklahoma Watch, people that I know, I see their reporting, I watch them in the state capitol, at City Hall, doing the work of being real journalists. On the national level, I really defer to groups like the Associated Press that are an international body with real trusted reporters, including here in Oklahoma City, who take the time to do the reporting, to fact check, to confirm, to check multiple sources, and not just put out quick news, breaking news alerts, trying to get a few extra clicks. People that are interested in telling the truth, the whole truth. Those are the kind of news sources that I seek after.
And Trace Savage got married. Can you believe
did.
it?
Congrats, Trace.
He's way over his head in that particular. She must have taken great pity on him. But, congratulations to Trace and his bride. Well, it's great to see you. I always appreciate all the work that you've done. Known you for a decade, and it appears that some of these issues you've been talking about for a decade, that Oklahomans are going to start looking at and needing to make decisions on these. It's moving from academic to there's some actionable items coming. Am I correct on that?
You are, and I'll say as we close, I think we have a narrow window of opportunity in Oklahoma to fix 3 major things. 1, end closed primaries and open those primaries to all voters, let all voters vote. 2, to reform the initiative petition process to ensure that the legislature can't take away our rights to use it, and to ensure that it's there for the next generation and generations to come. And 3, before the next redistricting cycle, which will be in 2031, we have a chance to pass independent redistricting and stop allowing politicians to draw their own districts.
And in your opinion, that would change the face of Oklahoma?
That would fundamentally change the face of Oklahoma. It would encourage people to participate more. It would shift the incentives that politicians have back to representing the majority of us, and put us on a path, I think, both of success and of re-attracting business back to our state. And
you're saying it would not be a partisan matter. It's more along the lines of a philosophical matter.
100%. All this stuff is nonpartisan. It's a power issue, right? The people in power want to stay in power, And that comes at the expense of citizens, of having the ability to self-govern the way that we all think we do. I'm interested in helping ensure that for the future.
And he is a future thinker. He's Andy Moore with Let's Fix This, my friend, and many organizations, journalist, philosopher, scientist. It's always great to see you, and best of luck.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching Hot Seat. See this again at news9.com and news on6.com, and follow me at MitchellTalks.